Hi everybody. So this video is on the content that we covered in the revision lesson 2 that not everybody could attend, and you'll be needing this worksheet that I handed out, and it covers the 4 chapters of reproductive strategies, reproduction in flowers, endocrine system, and reproduction in humans. So if you study all the terms and definitions and things that you see on this on the questions here from 1 to 5, the memo is on the back of this page. You should be fine for the reproduction in flowers, but please also just learn along with that the diagram of where the parts are so you can label the parts of the flower. And then I just quickly want to give attention to question 1.17, where it says the phenomena whereby a normally diploid cell or organism acquires one or more additional sets of chromosomes. So the answer there is polyploidy. Now, this is in the prelim, and I'm worried that you might not get it because when we did it in class, we did it as part of genetics and not actually part of the flowers. So what is polyploidy? Well, if you look at this diagram I drew on the board, so it's not the best quality, you remember that we've already learned that when meiosis occurs, you'll have a diploid cell that we give a symbol 2N for, and when it undergoes meiosis, it forms gametes that are now haploid, and we use the symbol N. But sometimes what we see in plants, so it doesn't happen in animals, just in plants, is we see that, for example, in strawberries this happens, that if there's 36 chromosomes in the diploid state of a normal strawberry, that they have the ability to undergo mitosis and form gametes. And then the gametes have retained all 36 chromosomes and are still 2N, which means if a gamete with 36 chromosomes and another gamete with 36 chromosomes fertilize or combine, you'll have a polyploid cell that forms. This polyploid strawberry obviously now has more than the normal diploid number of chromosomes, and it also happens to be much larger than a normal diploid strawberry, which is a benefit to farmers that cultivate strawberries. The next page for the exam practice questions is on reproductive strategies. So there's not that much in a paper usually on this. So if you just learn these definitions and at the back you'll find the memo, then you should be completely fine for your prelim. This time there's no K strategy and R strategy graphs in, but you're not going to get away with it for the finals. The third set of questions is exam practice questions on the human reproductive system. So again, the terms are given on the front and then the definitions are given on the back of the page. So for human reproductive system, obviously very important that you need to label and give the functions of all the parts of the male and female reproductive system. And then the most important thing is obviously the menstrual cycle. There's also a bit of contraception in there, but let's look at the menstrual cycle. This diagram you received in class, and it shows that the menstrual cycle takes place over 28 days. Day 1 starts the process of menstruation, so it doesn't matter which day of the month it is. For the body, for this timeline, day 1 is the day that it will start her period. It lasts usually on average about 5 days. Now when day 1 happens and the menstrual cycle starts, the pituitary gland realizes that there wasn't a pregnancy and it starts secreting a hormone called FSH. FSH is secreted for about 2 weeks to stimulate the follicle to produce an ovum. Now the follicle is properly known as the Graafian follicle. On day 14, the Graafian follicle is large and the ovum inside is fully mature. So the pituitary gland then secretes its second hormone called luteinizing hormone. Only on day 14 it is secreted, which is going to cause that Graafian follicle to rupture and release the mature ovum. This is called ovulation. So the release of that ovum, which only occurs on day 14. Now, once ovulation has occurred, the ruptured follicle forms a little patch of scar tissue called the corpus luteum. So during the first 14 days, oogenesis happens. In other words, the formation of the ovum. While on day 14, ovulation happens, the release of this ovum. Don't get confused between the terms oogenesis and ovulation. Now, if you look at the bottom of the underneath the timeline, you can actually see during oogenesis and during the development of the Graafian follicle, the follicle itself actually secretes estrogen. And once ovulation has happened and the corpus luteum is formed, the corpus luteum secretes progesterone. And both estrogen and progesterone causes the endometrium to thicken and become more vascular, which means it prepares the uterus for implantation in case you fall pregnant. The changes in the concentration or the blood levels of the 4 hormones we just learnt about can be shown in a graph like this. So the color coding is given there, so you will probably not be asked to draw a graph like this, but you will be asked to actually identify them on a graph, and it's pretty simple. I usually start with luteinizing hormone. Because we know that it's only secreted on day 14, you'll notice that it's pretty much a straight line except you've got a peak on day 14. Progesterone is also pretty easy to identify because we know progesterone is secreted by the corpus luteum after it was formed on day 14. So you'll actually see a pretty much very little progesterone, and then it starts peaking or start lifting in the second half of the menstrual cycle. So you see the peak after day 14. Follicle stimulating hormone, as we learned, is secreted in the first 2 weeks because it forms the follicle, it produces the ovum in the first 2 weeks. So you'll actually see a rise in the hormone level of FSH before day 14, and then it levels out afterwards. I know it's got this little bump in the middle, but don't let that put you off. It's higher in the first 2 weeks and low in the second 2 weeks. Estrogen fluctuates quite a bit, so it rises just before day 14 and kind of makes 2 peaks after that. So the last line that I would try to identify when I'm identifying all of them would be estrogen by looking at the 2 peaks or the 2 bumps it makes. So there's various changes that the endometrium, the uterus and the ovaries go through, as well as the levels of hormones as they change during this 28-day cycle. So we can actually divide the cycle in 4 steps. So the first 5 days, the first phase is menstruation, which is followed by the follicle phase, then ovulation, and then the last phase, which is called the luteal or the secretory phase. The last page in your exam practice questions is on the endocrine system. And again, there's some definitions and descriptions given there with the answers on the back. Now, it's very, very important that you actually learn the location of each of the glands, that you're able to recognize it on a picture like this, or that you can describe it in words as we did in our table summary. So an easy way for you to remember these guys in the correct order from the top to the bottom is a very cute way that OWAM actually figured out.
I don't know how to spell toad.
Afrikaans. Why is the X very important to Afrikaans? It is definitely M.
Because just to remember the order that it goes down in. So it's Harry, so it's just going in a downward, yeah. So hypothalamus, that's Harry Potter's all up there. Torch, adrenal gland is Afrikaans. In London is Isis of Langerhans. On ovary, Thursday, testes.
Thanks, OWAM. I hope that helps everybody else as well. Remember the names of the glands and the order they go from top to bottom in the body. And for homeostasis, which is part of the endocrine system, we're going to learn you need to know 3 mechanisms of the negative feedback mechanism that the body tries to maintain a constant internal environment in. And those would be maintaining blood glucose levels, reproductive hormones, and then metabolic rate by the use of TSH and thyroxine. So the first one is maintaining a constant blood glucose level. This is done by insulin increasing the rate of absorption of the glucose by the cells, increasing respiration rate, and also converting glucose into glycogen, which will be stored in the muscles or in the liver. If blood glucose levels go down too much, glucagon is the hormone that will be secreted that will convert glycogen back into glucose, moving the glucose from the cells back into the bloodstream. So I've done blood glucose levels in a previous video, so just watch that if you kind of get stuck. But this is important because it's in every prelim, every final. The other negative feedback mechanism is the control of thyroxine and TSH. The interaction between the two controls the metabolic rate. So this is also very important. Please watch the video that I've made on that. And then lastly, the third negative feedback mechanism that is important for the prelim is the one that is on reproductive hormones. So we actually looked at that one when we did contraception, where we learned that the contraceptive pill is high in progesterone. The manufacturers of the contraceptive pill has actually stolen this idea from the negative feedback mechanism that works in the female reproductive system. High levels of progesterone inhibits the secretion of FSH and LH, which means in the female body, if there is no FSH and LH, you're not going to have oogenesis, you're not going to have ovulation, and the woman will not fall pregnant.